Back to her Expanding Your Horizons Meet a Scientist series. This is where we sit down and get to talk to a real scientist and ask the questions that you've submitted either on our website or last year's webinar. My name is Jenna, and I would like to introduce our very special guest, Dr. Bethany Cummings. Bethany got her bachelor's in both biology and economics at Brandeis University. She then earned her Ph.D. in molecular, cellular, and integrative physiology and earned her doctorate in veterinary medicine at UC Davis. She is now an associate professor at UC Davis's Department of Surgery. So Bethany, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know I covered a lot.
Okay, so maybe I'll just start with my path, which I'll repeat some of what you just said, but I guess maybe give more context. So let's see. I grew up in California, and growing up, I was, always had tons of pets and loved animals, and basically, was that kid that wanted to be a veterinarian from a really young age. And that's kind of what drew me to science, was just my love of animals. And so then I went to Brandeis for my undergraduate degree and wanted to get more animal experience. And that's actually how I got involved in research. So I sought out a lab that was led by a DVM doing animal research, and just happened to be studying metabolic disease, and just fell in love with research and the whole process, and also fell in love with the topic of metabolic disease. Obviously it's super prevalent and underlies so many diseases, even beyond diabetes and obesity. Anyways, we'll get into that more. Yeah, so kind of fell in love with research through that process, and got to the end of my undergraduate degree and started to feel a bit torn. Did I want to become a veterinarian practicing clinical medicine, or did I want to continue down this research road? And that pushed me to apply and get into a DVM PhD program at UC Davis. And that was, a really great experience that allowed me to explore all the different avenues that were available to me in veterinary medicine. There's so much more than going off into clinical practice. Obviously, that's one very popular path, but yeah, it was a really great program that opened up my mind to the possibilities and really reaffirmed for me my love of research. So it was during that time that I also started to really understand and realize the power of bringing in clinical medicine, whether it be veterinary or human medical, into research. It really started to realize the power of that, and I can kind of talk about the science behind that a little bit more, but enjoyed both realms, but decided to continue with research. And so then I was recruited out to Cornell as an assistant professor, and loved that experience too, like set up an independent lab, learned how to do all the things involved in doing that, and had a lot of fun in the process. And so then just recently I got recruited back to UC Davis, this time into the medical school in the Department of Surgery, and I'm currently affiliated with both institutions while I'm kind of going through this transition. And that's my career in a nutshell.
That was great. So one question that I kind of came up with is, how did you even hear about a dual degree for DVM PhD? I feel like it's not something I had ever heard of coming into grad school, or even when I was applying.
Yeah, that's a good question. And that forces me to think back. So I will admit, so when I was applying, unfortunately, there weren't even that many DVM PhD programs. So I think I applied to all the programs that were in existence at the time. So yeah, it wasn't a well-known thing. And I think the reason I found out about it was, so at Brandeis, it was a very science-driven institution, and there were a lot of pre-med students and a lot of students going after MD PhDs. And I was very I'm going after a DVM. I even started a pre-veterinary club in undergrad. I was that kid. And through that process, knowing that there were these MD PhD programs, I think that prompted me to look into whether there were DVM PhD programs. And then it's oh, my state school has one. Great. But yeah, it wasn't abundantly obvious that those exist. But through obviously Cornell has an amazing DVM PhD program, and kind of through my participation in that program, it's been really exciting to see how many more programs are cropping up and how, how many more students are being recruited into these. So it's hopefully going to become a path that more and more people are aware of earlier on.
Was there anyone who like helped you realize that you could pursue both? I feel like I would have been very torn.
Yeah, no, so that's a good question. I think that was my undergraduate research advisor. So like I said, when I started undergrad, I was very singularly focused on veterinary medicine. I didn't really even understand what a career in research was or looked like. And so there was this guy, his name's Dr. Casey Hayes, who had a DVM and a PhD and was running a lab. And I don't, maybe there were others at Brandeis, I don't remember, but he, kind of popped out to me. And so I started working with him in my first year of undergraduate. And, so he had done, he didn't do a formal DVM PhD program, but he had done both degrees. So I did have that role model. And he was great. He was so engaged with his students, he and I still email, which is, amazing all those years later. So yeah, I would say he was one of my primary resources in realizing that that was a potential path forward.
That's awesome. Because
Yeah.
that's not something I had ever heard of until coming to graduate school. And it's like, oh, could have done something like that. So let's kind of like rewind a little bit. Can you tell us what a day in your life is like at work? So like what kind of things inspire your work and what you do?
Yeah, so I would say, so at this point in my career, a day in my life at work is really, I think, largely just involved in communication and talking with all the different parties that I need to talk to, reach our common research goals. So obviously that includes, the students and trainees and personnel in my lab. That includes, the other administrators that help support my lab. That includes collaborators or, other people that just happen to be studying similar things. We like to pick each other's brains. So I would say the predominant thing I work on is communication. Outside of that, it's going to be, obviously keeping up with the literature, teaching, and obviously getting the funding we need to to do the research. So a lot of grant writing and everything that goes into that. So at this point in my career, it's not common for me to be in the lab and like doing the science. But obviously that's what got me into all of this. I love actually doing the science and making the data and doing all that. So I still try to get into lab and do things here and there, but less and less, it's less and less common that happens.
So can you speak to what being in academia is like as opposed to what a clinical setting would be like?
Yeah, obviously it's incredibly different. And I guess, it was really nice through my education to get some exposure to both. And, I think that, different people are gonna like, the different sides of things because they are so different, even though conceptually the themes are so similar. I think that, in clinical medicine, it's a lot more of instant gratification, at least relative to research, right? So in the clinic, you're, having to respond quicker, but you're also getting results quicker and, hopefully seeing your patients improve and all of that. Whereas in research, it's just a slower process. You have to read the literature and develop an idea and a hypothesis, and then how am I going to test that? And then you actually have to test it, and then generally your experiment's going to fail and you're going to find all these different things that you got to fix, and then you do it again, and and a lot of time will elapse before you might get that sense of accomplishment. So I think that that's actually one of the main things to kind of, when you get to the point of figuring that out, that you have to think about your personality and whether you kind of like to be on the go and like seeing progress happen in a day, or if you like kind of slow and steady and, maybe you'll see an accomplishment a year from now.
So you mentioned like experiments failing, and that's something that's come up before on this series. Do you have any advice for dealing with, that perceived failure? Because We've talked about how it might feel and seem like failure, but it's actually an opportunity for like unexpected results.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's kind of a broader lesson in life, right? We always
Mhm.
like learn the most from our failures rather than, necessarily our successes. And so the same is true in science. And, if you're doing science that's, super cutting edge and really trying to make those vertical leaps, you're going to be doing stuff that, is maybe a little bit farther out there and is you're gonna have to fail a couple times before you figure out all the right conditions or what have you. And so yeah, like the failure process is part of the scientific process, and it's how you get to the final end goal. And like I said, I think it's an important thing for life, building resiliency and learning from mistakes, and that's how we grow, and that's just how science goes.
Yeah. So kind of with that, do you have any other advice for our younger scientists of any age really, but like particularly like middle schoolers or high schoolers?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say like big congratulations to you for engaging in this program and starting to think about these things. I really, it wasn't even on my mind when I was, that age, that research and academic research and all that existed. So I think it's really cool that, they're getting exposed to these ideas and that these career paths exist. And I think the main message is just, keep an open mind and, reflect on, what you enjoy and what you feel like you get fulfillment out of, and keep following that path and see where that takes you. And if it takes you in the science direction, that's great.
So one of the questions we like to end on is, when did you first feel that you were really a scientist? Like when did you think of yourself as a scientist? Was it more of a gradual thought process, or was it this like aha moment? You were just in the lab one day and it clicked like, oh, I'm a scientist.
Huh, that's an interesting question. I mean, so I think off the cuff, there's never been a moment where I was like, oh, I'm a scientist now. I think it just felt really natural. And like I said, I think it started happening in undergrad, because prior to undergrad, I really had no idea what research really was and what it looked like. I mean, obviously in high school, you do like little labs here and there, but, participating in laboratory research in undergrad is really when I started to figure out what it was. And then, I was a part of that process and it just felt really natural. So I guess I would vaguely just say when I started doing research,
So like
but
a
I don't think I
gradual,
ever, yeah, I guess gradual, but yeah, I don't think I ever, was like, now I'm a scientist.
yeah, like I don't know, like maybe it was like the first time you put on a lab coat and it really sunk in.
Yeah, like I said, it felt really natural to me, and I think that's part of the reason why I went down this path, because I was like,
Hmm.
yeah, this is right. This is what I
Yeah.
should be doing. So this kind of feeling that it was just natural. But yeah, I think kind of a gradual adjustment and thought process.
And then our last question, which is the fun question of the night. What's the goofiest thing you've done for science?
Oh, I have one. So, like I said, always been engaged in animal research and always really passionate about animal care and welfare and all of that. And so, when I was in my graduate studies, all of my work was in rats. And rats are, in my opinion, adorable. And they're also just very social animals. And so, something we started doing, we called it rat playtime. So we literally went out and bought a kiddie pool and a bunch of like toys from like a pet store. And once a week we would, we had different studies. So I think we kind of kept it to like a specific study, and we pull the rats out and put them in the kiddie pool, and they would have a really, really great time. It's crazy too, like, because we kind of had a schedule for it. Like, I think we always did it like on Thursday afternoons, and the rats knew that it was playtime. So they would
I love
all
it.
be like running around their cages like Thursday afternoon. And when they saw the kiddie pool come out, like they knew it was go time.
I love it.
Yeah, no, it was super fun. And now we're primarily in mice, and I really wish we could still do something like that, but the mice just are a lot more skittish, so I don't think they would enjoy being piled
And
in.
mice aren't as social as rats, right?
I mean, I think that they are social, but they're just, I think, have much stronger, I don't know how to put it, like prey instinct. So they're just, I think, a lot more like careful and want to hide and be safe. Whereas the rats were just like, I want that ball.
One last, maybe not as silly question. How did you make the decision to work in animals?
Yeah, I mean, so that was, like I said, kind of largely driven by like the passion for veterinary medicine. So I got into research because I wanted to work with animals, and then fell in love with research. And, through that process, kind of learned how effective and how much we can learn from various animal models. So, they're a really important part of, the process of advancing healthcare. And so that's why I pursued, veterinary training, so that I'm, well versed in that side of things, and that can help translate into, how we model certain diseases to make it as, accurate as possible, or as translationally relevant as possible to the human condition.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Bethany, for taking the time to answer our questions. I thought it was great to sit down and talk with you, and I hope our listeners enjoyed it as much as I did. If you would like to know more about EYH, please go to our website at eyh.cornell.edu, where you can learn more about EYH, submit questions, and explore more about our previous programming. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll find a link to our website in the description, and please subscribe to our channel for more content. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.